Okay, so we've talked about loose connective tissue, so areolar, reticular, and adipose connective tissue. Then we talked about dense connective tissue, dense regular, dense irregular, and dense elastic. So now we're going to talk about cartilage. And so what is cartilage? Well, cartilage has an extracellular matrix that has collagen. And remember, dense connective tissue has a lot of collagen in it, as well as loose connective tissues all have a little bit of collagen there. The collagen fibers give it strength. It also has elastic fibers embedded in it, and you have this firm gelatinous ground substance, and that binds water and gives cartilage resiliency, which means that it can basically you can squish it and it bounces back. Okay, so so what would you use that for? Well, you'd use that for shock absorption, flexibility, reducing friction, and because it can be very smooth since there's a lot of water in it, two pieces of cartilage can slide against each other real well. And where would you need that? Well, say the ends of two bones that are meeting. Put cartilage on the end of those, and then those bones can slide back and forth across each other. So think about your knee joint. So when it bends, it slides. Okay, so when your leg bends, the bones can slide against each other with this cartilage, and it doesn't break down. You're not rubbing bone on bone. So let's see. What else? So you reduce friction, provide support, shock absorption, flexibility. There's a glassy ground substance. The ground substance that holds that water, binds that water. There's maybe some thin fibers in it, but you can't really see them in that. So the cells that are found in cartilage are called chondroblasts. These cells are the cells that secrete the fibers and the ground substance, and then they become isolated in I call it a little house. It's called a lacuna. Okay, little house. The cell is here, and it makes this like little house around it with a little bit of liquid around there, and it makes this little. It's called a lacuna. It's called a little, which means little lake, and they transform then into chondrocytes. So you have these live cells in the middle of cartilage, so you can reform the cartilage if you need to an extent. And let's see what else. So what types of cartilage are there? Well, there's three types. There's hyaline cartilage, there's elastic cartilage, and there's fibrocartilage. So hyaline cartilage is the most predominant cartilage in the body, containing fine collagen fibers. If you look at it in the microscope, it just looks glassy. You can't see any fibers at all. The extracellular matrix looks very smooth and homogeneous. All you see are the chondrocytes inside the lacuna, and then the smooth all the way around them. The collagen fibers are very, very thin. They're not visible in a compound microscope. It's firm and resilient. So like we talked about, hyaline cartilage is the cartilage that's on the ends of the bones. So in your knee joints and your elbow joints and like all kinds of different places. Elastic cartilage, it's similar to hyaline cartilage in a lot of ways, except the matrix is packed with elastin fibers. So this cartilage is much more flexible. Elastic cartilage is not the same as dense elastic connective tissue. Okay, so just remember that those are two completely different things. Fibrocartilage is a cartilage that has fewer lacunae and fewer chondrocytes. Its extracellular matrix is jam-packed with thick collagen fibers. It gives it lots of strength, lots of tensile strength, so you can compress it very easily. So, and strength is similar to dense connective tissue. Under dense regular or irregular connective tissue, it's very strong, and you'll see collagen fiber structures in this tissue under a microscope. There are lots of thick fibers, and you can really see them. So where would you find this? Where would you need cartilage that's providing a lot of strength and also compressibility? Well, you'd find that between your vertebra. So this is what makes up your discs. If you've heard of discs, there's each of your vertebrae sit on top of each other, and so between them is a disc, and that disc is made of fibrocartilage. Okay, next slide. So here's a picture of hyaline cartilage. This is in developing bone. It doesn't really matter too much where it came from. It just a picture to show you. And so what you see are these. This is a cell. Let me go to a different color. Let me go to white. Here's a cell. That's a lacuna. Here's the cell. Here's the cell. Here's the cell. Okay. So you got your lacuna with the cell inside it, right? So there you go. So there's lacuna with a cell. And then outside that, this is all the extracellular matrix. Here, let me go with a completely different color. How about blue? No, how about red? There we go. So this is your extracellular matrix here. Okay, there's your ECM. Right? And you can't really, it's hard to see fibers in there. You look at it and you're like, well, maybe there are some fibers in there. In this picture, it does look like there's a little bit of fibers. Usually it just looks really smooth, really glassy. You can't see anything. Okay? So, all right. And here's more. You know, all these spaces between this is all the extracellular matrix here. Okay? All right, next slide. So here's your, here's a diagram of the lacuna and connecting a chondrocyte. So here's a lacuna with a chondrocyte in it. Here's the nucleus there, showing that. And this is all showing the extracellular matrix there. So, all right, next slide. Here's hyaline cartilage from the trachea. And you can see here's a lacuna here with a cell inside it. Here's a lacuna with a cell inside it. Lacuna with a cell inside it. Here's, you know, so you can start picking all these out all over the place. And then here's your extracellular matrix right there. Oops. Okay. So there's your ECM, your extracellular matrix. Sorry, I pressed extracellular matrix. ECM. All right. So that's hyaline cartilage. Next slide. Here's fibrocartilage. This is what it looks like. And you see these thick bundles of collagen fibers, and they're arranged not really parallel, but in this picture it looks like they're arranged kind of like this, okay. So it looks more like these fibers are arranged like this, okay, which you can see would give you lots of compressibility up and down. Okay, so you compress that down, it would pop back up. So it gives you a lot of strength. This picture probably just happens to be this way. They aren't necessarily all in this kind of V kind of formation, but it does give you this compressibility. It's a tough fiber. So that means you can jump up and down, and your discs don't just go all the way together. Sorry, your vertebrae don't come all the way together and bump into each other. There's this disc between them made of fibrocartilage. Okay, and you can see here that you have a chondrocyte in a lacuna there. So here's your chondrocyte here. So chondrocyte, oocyte, and 3 is pointing to the lacuna. And this is fibrocartilage here. Okay, next slide. Or extracellular matrix is made of, sorry, I should say, it's not fibrocartilage. Take that back out. That's not. Fibrocartilage includes the lacuna and the chondrocytes. I shouldn't have said that. So this is your extracellular matrix made of collagen fibers. Okay, that's number 1. All right, next slide. So here we go. Here's collagen fibers in the ground substance, nucleus of the chondrocyte, and lacuna containing a chondrocyte. So here's a lacuna with a chondrocyte inside, right? So here happens to be 3 little chondrocytes, all happy, sitting inside a lacuna, and then here's another one here. So, and then you have those collagen fibers. They're not lined up like you would have in dense regular connective tissue. So these collagen fibers are, but they're kind of in a line, but they go different directions. It gives you a lot of strength from compressibility. So that's fibrocartilage. Next slide. And here's fibrocartilage from an intervertebral disc. You can also spell it disc, D-I-S-C. So here's some lacunae with chondrocytes in them. Pointing to some over here. These are collagen bundles. So that's fibrocartilage from an intervertebral disc. And you can see that the collagen fibers are going somewhat parallel, but they also go different directions, so it gives you compressibility. All right, next slide. Okay, here's elastic cartilage. This is from your ear. So here you can, once again, you can see a couple of chondrocytes in a lacuna, and there's a chondrocyte in a lacuna. Here's another couple here, and here's another couple here. They're kind of pairing up for some reason in this picture. And then you have all these fibers that you can see, right? You can see all these fibers really easily. So this is elastic cartilage, okay? So that's your fibers. Your extracellular matrix is all elastic fibers. And so why would you want to have elastic fibers? Well, you got the pinna of the ear, okay? There's your ear there. And so you can like take it and you can twist it around different directions and it flips back in the same position it was. So you can flip it forward, it pops back. So so there's a lot of elastic cartilage in your ear. So that's why this picture is showing this, because you have a lot of elastic cartilage there. There's also another place to find elastic cartilage. It's in the epiglottis. So when you swallow, it flips down, so it covers up the trachea, and then it opens back up again. So it just flops back and forth. So it's very elastic, very flexible. So because you don't want it to like kind of wear out, because then you have a hard time swallowing. So you always want it to be able to just stay in the same kind of shape and just flop back and forth. So that's what elastic cartilage does for you. Next slide. So here's another picture showing the chondrocytes with the nucleus, elastic fibers in the ground substance, and the lacuna containing a chondrocyte down there. Then there's a part around this called the perichondrium. I'm going to maybe show this on the next slide. I can't remember. Next slide. So, no, it's not. Okay. Don't worry about it. So, perichondrium just meaning around the cartilage area. So, all right. So we have chondrocytes in the lacuna, and then you can see the elastic fibers in there. So you can see these dark fibers. When you use the stain, they stain dark. So, you say the lacuna. So here's a lacuna with a cell in it, and here's a couple of them here. Here's one here. Here's one here. Here's one here, and then you can see the dark fibers there. Okay, of the elastic cartilage. All right, next slide. This particular one's from the epiglottis, as it points out over here. Okay, next slide. Okay, and just to show you, this is the pinna of the ear. This is the external part of the ear. I just threw this in there just to show you that you think you're learning a lot of stuff, but you can keep going in anatomy. Anatomy people love to name absolutely every little bump and every little divot in everywhere. So these are all the names to all the different parts of the external part of the ear. That's not even the whole ear. That's just the external part. Okay. So one of them I think is kind of fun is the Darwinian tubercle. Some people have this. There's a little spot on your ear that you can feel, and it sticks out a little bit. So it like on the edge of the ear, you'll feel around there, and then it'll kind of go out like this. So here's your ear coming around this way. And that would be the Darwinian tubercle right there, that part. So on the outside of the ear, like there. So you can feel it. Mine's right there. So you can see where my fingers are. All right. But just to show you, there's lots more names to learn. So if you're feeling overwhelmed, you don't have to know this stuff. You don't have to know this slide, but just realize that there's a lot more stuff to learn. So when you start specializing, say you go into, I don't know, say you like start studying orthopedics, and so that's why I like somebody who's there's a hip person or a knee person or a shoulder person, because they kind of specialize in those. They start learning all the ways that particular joint fits together, and so it's hard to know like all the stuff about the entire body. So and I just want you to know there's names for like absolutely everything in the body. All right, just for fun. Okay, next slide. So where is cartilage? Well, you have hyaline cartilage. You find it on the ends of long bones. You find it in the trachea and the bronchi, the ends of the ribs. It's called the costal cartilage. So if you press right here, here's the sternum, and then you go to the side, you feel the rib right there. That's actually cartilage right there. It doesn't turn into bone until a little bit farther out. Okay. It's also the embryonic skeleton. You find hyaline cartilage. That's before it forms, and then it ossifies. It turns into bone. Fibrocartilage, you find that in intervertebral discs. Also, there's some pads in the knees. They're called the meniscus, each meniscus in the knee. There's a couple menisci in the knee. And there's also something called the pubic symphysis. The hip bones, they come together in the anterior, in the front. So, and where they come together, the pubic bones come together, there's a little span of cartilage right there between. That's called the pubic symphysis, where the two pubic bones come together. Then you have elastic cartilage. You find that in the external ear, the pinna of the ear, also in the auditory tube, and then also epiglottis of the larynx as well. Okay, next slide. Okay, so we've done loose connective tissue, dense connective tissue, cartilage, and now we're on to bone. So we've done the more extensive ones. Now we're going to do bone and blood, and we're going to spend a lot of time on bone the next 3 classes. So we're going to go over this somewhat briefly in this class. Okay, so what is bone? Well, bone's a connective tissue. It's the hardest of the connective tissues, obviously, as you know. You can knock up there, and it's very hard. Extracellular matrix is organized into layers called lamellae. Okay, so there's instead of having like parallel bundles of things, you have actual layers. So, and we'll show you what these look like. And each layer is called a lamella. So lamellae is plural. So lamella is each layer, and those contain collagen fibers, which give strength and flexibility, a ground substance. But in bone, since the collagen fibers, it would be very flexible. But you also have salts like calcium, and that gives it strength and hardness. So that's where the hardness comes from, is actually calcium phosphate and some calcium carbonate as well. The cells that are in bone are called osteoblasts. So blast is like always a name for a cell. Usually it's referred to an immature cell, but they secrete the fibers and the ground substance, and they become isolated in lacuna also, just like you do in cartilage. So cartilage and bone are similar in some ways, okay? And that's why you form hyaline cartilage, and that can form into bone, okay? It becomes calcified and turns into bone. So the osteoblasts secrete the fibers and the ground substance. They become isolated in lacuna and transform into osteocytes. But since you have this hard ground substance around them, how do you communicate with, say, blood vessels around them? You can't run a blood vessel to every single one of these. So what you have are small canals that connect the lacuna to other lacuna, and then to the large canals that have blood vessels. So we're going to see how that works. But basically, you have a cell there. It's in a lacuna, okay? And these lacuna have what are called canaliculi coming off, okay? And this connects to another lacuna over here, which has a cell in it, and that can connect over here to an area that has some blood vessels in it, okay? So there's an artery, and here's a vein. All right, so that's how those cells can stay alive. They're connected through these canaliculi to areas that have arteries and veins in them, and that allows diffusion of waste back and forth along these little tiny canals. And there's 2 types of bone. There's compact bone and there's spongy bone. Okay, compact bone, as you might expect, is compact, and so it doesn't have a whole lot of space in it. It's just the bone is very solid. Okay, it's also called cortical bone because it tends to be it is on the exterior of bones, and the extracellular matrix is organized into repeating structural units. Sorry about that. Let me take that back out. Is organized into repeating structural units called osteons, and these look like tree trunks. So you cut a tree and you see the tree rings. That's exactly what an osteon looks like. You can see the rings. In the center of each osteon is a central canal, and that's where the artery and veins. Actually, I should have said arteries. There's an artery and a vein inside the central canal. So then you have these canaliculi that connect to the central canal. We're going to look at all this and see what it looks like. Spongy, also called cancellous or trabecular bone, is on the interior of a bone. The extracellular matrix is arranged in what are called trabeculae. So trabecular bone. So you have a trabeculae, which means little beams. Okay, so these are flat plates. It makes a lattice-like network, kind of like, and it looks, when you cut through it, it looks sort of like a sponge. Okay, so you have these thin, bony columns. And why would you have that? Well, on the end, so you have cortical bone on the outside, and then you have spongy bone making these cross hairs, or not cross, yeah, well, you call them cross hairs, I guess, cross beams inside the bone, and so that gives structural integrity to the bone on the inside. And since these beams, they aren't all jam-packed next to each other, there's space between them, so the space between them allows other things to be in there, and stuff you'll find in there is bone marrow. So you have bone marrow between the trabeculae in the bone, in the spongy bone. Okay, so bone, it's hard connective tissue because it has mineral salts, calcium, and there's two types. There's compact and cortical. Sorry, there's compact and spongy bone. Golly. Anyway, I know this gets long. I'm sorry. I know you guys are. Yeah, watch this in segments. All right, next slide. So here we go. This is bone. Okay, this is the end of a long bone, and this would be the end of the femur. So this is the femur here. And we're looking at on the outside there, that's compact bone, okay? Or cortical. Cortical meaning, cortex means bark, so that means the outside, so cortical meaning of the outside of the exterior. So that's the exterior part, so compact bone. Spongy bone is all the stuff that's on the inside, okay? And you can see all those little spaces there. It looks kind of spongy. If you look down here, look at this part here. So it looks, spongy down there. So you have compact cortical bone on the outside, spongy bone on the inside, compact cortical, spongy bone on the inside. And I'm not going to talk about all these other features. We'll talk about those features later on. I just want to point out there's trabecular or spongy bone and cortical bone on the outside, okay? And the end of the bone is covered, interestingly enough, this blue right here, it's almost always in blue, is called articular cartilage. Introduce another word, articular cartilage, because two bones, when they come together, that's called an articulation. They articulate when they come together. So it's called cartilage where the bones articulate. And that articular cartilage is made of hyaline cartilage. So that provides the smooth surface around which these bones move. So the femur sticks into the hip socket and can rub around in there because it has articular hyaline cartilage on the outside. And the socket that it fits into also has hyaline cartilage on the inside of it. So that's two smooth surfaces to rub against each other and reduce friction. Okay, next slide. So this is what compact bone looks like. So here's referred to as an osteon here. Okay, so you can see like these, it looks like tree rings. Okay, so you have there, and you kind of come around here. There's another ring, and this is the central canal right here. So that's just a picture. This is out of your guys' book, just showing what the osteon looks like. So this is compact bone. We're going to talk a lot about this next time. So next slide. And I guess I should point out this right here is a lacuna. That's a lacuna. Here's a lacuna. I guess I'm going to go to white on this. So here's a lacuna, right? Here's a lacuna. Here's a lacuna. So each of these lacuna has an osteocyte in it, has a bone cell in it, okay? And then here you can see all these lines coming off of it, right? Going towards the center, because this right here that's your central canal that has the artery and vein in it. Okay, so these little canaliculi are reaching all the way down here to the middle so they can get some nutrients and bring it back to that osteocyte that's sitting in its lacuna. And all this is hard matrix all around this. Okay, but you have these live cells that are in there, so these live cells are able to produce more bone if you need to. And so here's another osteon. I'll circle this part of it. So there's your osteon there. There's central canal, and you got layers coming around here and like around there. So you can see the layers. You can see it better in this one. Here's layers. Each of these layers is referred to as a lamella. Okay, so we'll get into that later on. Don't worry about it. So for this class, it's just enough to know that this, when you see this is compact bone. This is bone, and this is compact bone. Okay, so that's what compact bone looks like under the microscope. This is this top one up here is magnified 400 times. So this is a 400x magnification. Okay, next slide. Here's an osteocyte in its lacuna. So this is the calcified extracellular matrix. Here's your osteocyte there, pointing that out. That's the nucleus. Nucleus here. Okay. And it's reaching out in these little canaliculi. Reaching out towards that central canal. And this is the lacuna here. All right, next slide. Spongy bone. So talk about cortical bone, what that looked like from a microscopic viewpoint. Now, spongy bone, it looks like this when you look at it on the microscope. Okay, it has these beams. This is a beam here. Here's a beam. Here's a beam. Here's a beam. Okay, that's a beam. There's a beam up here. It goes all different directions, but it has lots of space between these beams, okay? And red blood marrow is going to fit between those beams. That's what this over here, if you, it's kind of pinkish. That's there's red marrow between the beams, or trabeculae. Between the little beams, I guess I should say. Between the little beams. All right. So, and then if you do a transverse section directly through one of these beams, this is what it looks like. So you have a lacuna, you have an osteocyte in there. So you have lacuna, there's an osteocyte there, osteocyte. And you also have some other things here. You have these cells around the outside. These are osteoblasts, and you have osteoclasts. And osteoblasts make bone, osteoclasts break down bone. Don't worry about that just yet. We'll worry about that later on. And then, let's see. And each one of these is referred to as a lamella. So this is a lamella. And then each of these little lines here, that and that and this, those are all canaliculi. We're going to go over all that stuff next time. So don't worry about learning all those words. All you need to know is that spongy bone has trabeculae, has these beams all over it. And so if you look at it in a microscope, you would see this kind of structure here. It looks a lot like an osteon, except it's kind of flattened. Okay. All right. Next slide. So under the microscope, this is what it looks like. So we've had these trabeculae that are going different directions, and these beams, and they branch. So what you see is this. If I can find my pen here, this is a beam of the trabeculae. Okay. So, and this is an osteocyte in its lacuna. So you can see, well, here's another one. Here's another one. Here's another one. Here's another one. You start seeing those all over the place, right? So I can keep circling all day long. So then you have these spaces. So here's the trabeculae. I'm going to draw the outline of the trabeculae here. Here as they branch. There. 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 Okay. Like that. And so you have this space between the trabeculae. So what is this? Well, this is all red marrow going through here, right? Okay. And the same, so there so here, as well as here, as well as over here. Okay? So there you go. As well as down here. All right. So that shows you what the trabeculae is and the red marrow is. So I should outline this one too. So see that. So what I've outlined is the outline of the trabeculae. Okay. So this is trabeculae. This is trabeculae. This is trabeculae. Okay, and this is trabeculae here. Just so you know what you're looking at here. So this is spongy bone. Okay, it has spaces between the trabecula or trabeculae. Next slide. Okay, just another diagram of spongy bone showing the space for the red blood marrow and the red marrow and here's the trabeculae. So here's one. Here's another. Here's another one going all the way around here. So this one goes over here. These are just all the trabeculae going all over the place. I can outline this all day long. So anyway. So that's the trabeculae with spaces for red blood marrow. All right, next slide. So where do you find osseous tissue or bone connective tissue? So compact bone is on the exterior of the bones, and spongy bone or trabecular bone is on the interior of the bones. Both of them provide support, protection, and mineral storage. And we'll get into that next time. So next slide. Okay. So we've done loose connective tissue, dense connective tissue, cartilage, bone, and we are now at blood, and this is one of the easiest ones because I'm sure you've seen pictures of red blood cells and all that stuff. So what is blood, and why is it included in connective tissue? It doesn't seem to connect anything. Well, you can kind of think of it as going around and providing support for other organs because it's carrying nutrients, but that seems a little fuzzy. But it turns out that there is one part of this that kind of makes it fit into connective tissue. You have red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets, and plasma. So plasma is the extracellular matrix. Okay, so far we've got cells and gels. We've got the cells, and we've got an extracellular matrix that has, but plasma is the liquid that's around the cells. So you're like, well, that's really ground substance. So how can it be the extracellular matrix? Well, there are proteins that are in this extracellular matrix that are called the clotting factors, okay? The clotting proteins, and they produce, so when if you jab your finger and you break into a blood vessel, platelets stick to there, and then there's a little protein that's exposed that causes the clotting factors to produce a clot, and those are fibers, and those fibers, so you have, I'll just draw let's see, let me take part of that out. So we have, let's say you jabbed into your a blood vessel here. Now, let's assume this is a sharp knife that jabbed into it. So you start leaking blood out. So platelets come and they try to start sticking here. And then the blood clotting factors come and they make this meshwork across it. And so you get fibers that are produced. That with platelets, they plug the hole. Okay? So that's what happens. So the fibers in the extracellular matrix are not present unless blood clotting is going on. So fibrin is produced. And you have one interesting thing about red blood cells is when they're mature, they don't have a nucleus. They're anucleate. They appear red on unstained slides because they have oxygen bound to hemoglobin. White blood cells, they do have a nucleus. and they appear white or clear on unstained slides. So it's really easy to tell red blood cells from white blood cells. Platelets are anucleate. They're actually little pieces of cells, and they're very small, and they're involved in blood clotting. The numbers of cells you have in your blood, remember we did the metric system, so we're going to talk about microliters here. So red blood cells are the most abundant ones. You have about 4 to 6 million per microliter. Next down is platelets. You have about 150 to 450,000 of those per microliter. And then white blood cells, you have 3.5 to 10,000 or so per microliter. So that gives you a relative abundance of each of those. So you have mostly red blood cells in your bloodstream. Red blood cells, then you have platelets, and then white blood cells, a few of those running around. Okay, next slide. So here's a blood smear. And blood smear is exactly what it means. You take a sample of blood from somebody, you take a microscope slide, and you smear it across the microscope slide, and it spreads out the cells so as you can see them. So you can see here's these are all, and the reason that this is a red blood cell. So I'll slow down a little bit. This is a white blood cell. Here's a white blood cell, and this tiny little guy is a platelet. Here's another platelet here. Here's another platelet here. Okay. So you can see lots of red blood cells all over the place. And you can see a few platelets. And you see a couple white blood cells. You also notice that the white blood cells have this really odd kind of shape in them, and that's a nucleus. They have a multi-lobar nucleus, the multiple lobes of the nucleus. You also notice the red blood cells that are here. They all have this like kind of clearish center to them, right? Well, why is that? Well, you remember a cell has a nucleus in it, and so if you think of a cell normally with a nucleus as, I'm trying to find my pin here. Here's a cell with nucleus, roughly round shaped. We'll just draw it that way. So it has a nucleus in it. Well, when it loses the nucleus, you have that. Well, if you look at it from the side, look at it from the cell with the nucleus, it's still kind of round looking on the side. But if you look at a red blood cell from the side, it looks like this. So it's skinny in the middle. And so when you look at on the light microscope, you have light coming up through here and here and here. So you have more light coming through the middle, so that's why the center of the cell looks white. So on the microscope slide. So there you go. So red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. Here's another slide, I believe it's from your book, showing red blood cells, so you can pick them out really easily. Platelet there, here, 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 here. These are red blood cells all through here. Here's white blood cell. Okay, so you have different types of white blood cells too. You notice this one has a multilobar nucleus. This one seems to have a single nucleus in it. So there's different types of white blood cells running around in there too. Okay, next slide. Okay, so so what is in blood? It's a connective tissue. It has red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets, and plasma. Plasma is a liquid part of the blood. So you have cells, and if you draw blood out and you take the cells out, then the liquid you're left with is called plasma. Okay, and that has clotting factors in it. So when you clot, then it produces the fibers. So that gives you the cells and the ground substance and the fibers. So it makes it a connective tissue. So it fits in the category fairly well that way. You kind of squeeze blood in this category because there's no other place to put it. It's not a muscle, it's not nervous tissue, and it's not epithelial tissue. So it's got to be connective tissue. So, all right, next slide.